Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Salai Lomakwidiri. The time is 14 minutes past 9 Central African time, and we're going to be swiftly moving to a very, very important development. South Africa's anti-apartheid movement has essentially issued a very, very strong and sweeping condemnation of what it describes as an illegal war by the United States and Israel against Iran, warning of devastating humanitarian consequences and accusing both nations of violating international law. It is a very, very detailed statement, very, very detailed document, and they're essentially calling on the South African government to take decisive action, including imposing sanctions, mobilizing global opposition, and pushing for a more unified stance within BRICS and all of our BRICS Plus partners. The call echoes a growing concern among civil society and faith-based organizations and many political movements who view the escalation as part of a broader pattern of geopolitical aggression with global implications. And to help us unpack these developments and what they mean for South Africa's foreign policy, and most importantly, our moral positioning, we're joined in studio by Reverend Nthla, a member of the National Executive Committee of South Africa's Council of Churches, and also a member of the Anti-Apartheid movement. Rev, thank you so much for joining us. A pleasure having you on Salam Media.
Thank you. And greetings to the audience as well.
And I think we'll get right into it, trying to understand and dissect the statement that your organization has pulled out, which you've essentially described the ongoing war against Iran and by the US and Israel as an illegal war. On what legal and most importantly moral grounds are you making some of these assertions?
Well, first of all, I think that there is up till now, at any rate, up till now, there has been a world order that is premised on the international law that holds all of the countries, particularly the member states of the UN, to abide by certain rules. Rules such as you should not go to war against a country that means you no harm, and that there is no verifiable evidence that there is such an inclination to cause you harm. Now, in the instance of this particular matter, you have both Israel and the USA somehow believing, in spite of the evidence, believing that Iran wants to genocide Israel. And they said the same thing about Gaza, that Gaza would like to genocide Israel, and therefore they genocided first. Now, the problem with this is that the world ought to act at least on the basis of the evidence that is available to everyone watching this war, that for Gaza, the aggressor was Israel, the one who had every evidence for genocide was Israel, and that as a country we took Israel to court precisely because the evidence was overwhelming. Now, to go to war without overwhelming evidence that there is genocide intended against you, it's something that one can't understand how the two countries, the two aggressor countries, the USA and Israel, have come to conclude to unleash such violence on the people of Iran and the neighboring countries in that region. So all of these, for not only because they break the law, the international law that exists, but also all moral sensibilities ought to be telling us that this sort of behavior is not a 21st century behavior. It belongs in the dark barbaric ages long ago, where there was no rule. The tragedy also for me, Slilo, is that there is religion playing into this, particularly the Christian religion that is implicated in people both in the USA who are Christians, who support Trump, who urge him on to do this thing because they believe in the way that they read their scriptures, that this is a necessary thing to happen, in spite of the evidence, in spite of the clear dubious motives of the aggressors of Trump, of Netanyahu. Not only is it a US thing, we have an ambassador here who comes from the US who is determined to make sure that as a country we withdraw the ICJ case. And how does he hope to do that? I suspect he would like to use the Christian community in this country. Because in the US, that is, if you want war, use the Christian community in the US, particularly the evangelical wing of the Christian community in the US. And so there has been signs of activism in this country where there is a legitimation of this war, supposedly on biblical grounds. Now, that there is no scripture that justifies this war. There is no reading of the scriptures that could remotely come close to justifying a war like this. And so it's just a political stealing of sacred scriptures to justify war.
And I think that's very, very important. So I want to jump in on that specifically because majority of South Africans will be heading over to the Easter weekend coming up. And as you mentioned, religion has been used so many times to justify some of these heinous crimes against humanity that we've seen in human history. But in recent years, obviously, being what we've witnessed, the genocide in Gaza, and also the recent war against Iran by Israel and the US, do you feel South Africa's churches essentially have done enough to almost educate and call for advocacy for countries like Palestine, for anti-war sentiment like we're currently seeing in Iran? Have our churches done enough? Has the South African Christian voice been loud enough to make sure that, number one, it educates, and number two, it mobilizes people to come out to the streets to join these protests, as we've seen with how the Zionists have done it, essentially?
Good question, Sly. I think at the level of voice, the dominant voice among the churches is anti-Zionism. The dominant voice, by which I mean, if you ask the Catholic Church or all the major churches, the South African Council of Churches, even the Evangelical Alliance in this country, which I heard, has issued statements to the effect that this is genocide that is going on in relation to Gaza. But all of this, the motivations of it and the brutality of it is pretty much unconscionable. Now, in terms of voice, yes, but that does not translate to mass mobilization. And we've learned that the hard way in the years of apartheid, that you could have prominent church leaders speak on a subject. It didn't mean the congregants are on the same page unless you actually deliberately mobilize those people. And so, for example, all of the Christian radio stations that exist, all tend to be Zionist.
True.
And that means the ordinary Christian on the pew who has not gone to seminary to read the scriptures for themselves and do research on those, is at the mercy of these radio stations. Add to that, you as televangelists speak into our context with very extreme right-wing views, so the cultural dominance of the US, the religio-cultural dominance of the US in Africa more broadly, because it's not even an South African issue alone. I was traveling in Kenya recently, speaking about why it is wrong for Christians to support this war effort of Israel against the Palestinians, but also more broadly in the region. I couldn't believe some of those pastors were saying it's the first time they hear an alternative view to the dominant one. The issue I'm raising with that is the mobilization on the ground has not been as strong as the voice at the top. And that's the task that we hope to be working on.
No, I think that would be very, very important. 90+% of South Africans are Christians, and you can only imagine if you garner that much support, the impact that it would have when it comes to mobilizing and calling for support, especially for the people of Palestine. I want to jump forward because we're running out of time. Because on your statement, one thing that came really, really strong was South Africa's role. You're calling on South Africa to take a very, very firm stance, and be very attentive when it comes to our BRICS Plus partners and the support that we give. What specific actions, from your perspective, do you feel the government needs to take immediately at this current moment?
Well, I think from where we sit, the validity of the voice of government, whether at the ICJ or in terms of this current war on Iran, is as strong as civil society formations, as long as the people on the ground support this. Now we're heading towards an election, a local election soon. This has become a political issue. And so, in a sense, we are calling upon South Africans to say this moral witness, moral position of the government should be understood, first of all, as the position of the people of this country, who themselves have gone through apartheid and know the horror it represents. And we wouldn't want that on anybody. So we're urging on South Africans to own that. But secondly, for the government to not cow down under pressure from such Zionist political parties that are there in parliament, because they are there. We know people like Gaten McKenzie, who's quite outspoken about Israel, the ACDP. There are voices there that opportunistically would throw Palestinian people under the bus for whatever funding they get for their parties. And so we would like for the government to stay firm on that and hold the course, and that to take that position as the people's position, not only a political party position. And thirdly, that muscle, such muscle as we have within the BRICS countries, should actually be brought up there in those levels also, so that we mobilize a global consensus. And that we've seen how that happens. I mean, when we took Israel to court, initially South Africa started alone, but pretty much, a whole number of other countries said yes to that, and they began to support that. So we believe it is possible to mobilize a global consensus on this. Even within the US, there's evidence that Trump does not command the majority of US citizens in terms of this. So it is possible to mobilize sufficient sentiment against this aggression and appeal to the moral sensibilities of the peoples of the world.
But realistically, how much influence would you say South Africa has on a conflict of the scale?
The conflict, the scale of, if by the scale you mean the bomb, the hardware that is being deployed at the theater of war, well, we probably can't stop those missiles. What we can stop is the people who license that killing to continue, to the degree that we can, for example, to use the US as an example, and Europe, we see an increasing number of European countries that were fully behind Israel's war on Gaza. And some of them are beginning to say no. Whether that is as a result of Trump's trade embargo or sanctions on them, or it is because of moral conscience, we don't know. But there are ways in which people can be pressured to withdraw their support for this effort. And so it's a political work, it's a diplomatic mobilization, and practically that's what we think is possible. Could we, I know that we're mobilizing, for example, the churches in the US to begin to raise their voice more strongly with regard to these issues, to strengthen their hand, so to speak. And we do the same with churches in Europe to say, and I say that from the point of view of being a reverend myself and working within that terrain, that the moral appeal is one that no church in the world can go against. Because we can argue the politics of it, but when it comes to the faith, the thing with the Christian faith, the last thing at the end of history that God will ask is not what political party were you, what religion were you. It will be when people were starving, when they were hungry, when people were naked, were imprisoned without just cause. What did you say or do? So those are the justice issues that will matter in the end. And all Christians know this. So to make an appeal based on how this will end up is a very powerful position to work from where we sit as Christians. From the Anti-Apartheid movement, we believe that there is also within the peoples of the world moral courage that we've seen in the past, and we want to tap into that.
There's a lot of people who would argue that ideology and practice are two different things. Ideologically, we would want South Africa to be head and shoulders above everyone else when it comes to speaking out against injustice anywhere in the world, as we did with the ICJ case against Israel. But there should be a line to be drawn. People argue that we are further antagonizing the United States of America that we need for trade, a very, very large economy, which we are already in loggerheads with. Do we really need another reason for Trump to hate South Africa?
They've already taken our Afrikaners.
Well, we can keep those. It's okay.
So, yeah, I think it's a good point. I mean, the idea, the reason evil triumphs in the world is that, take slavery. When slavery were campaigns raging to end slavery in Europe, slavery was of economic benefit to Europe and to United Kingdom. Let's start there. So those who campaigned against slavery had to accept the economic costs of that. It would mean you can't make money the way that you used to be. But the guts, the courage to proceed even if you suffer economically, that's the clearest sign of moral courage. That's the clearest sign. I mean, our own liberation struggle was one on the basis that a lawyer who could otherwise make good money for himself and his family was willing to forgo that and stay in Robben Island for decades. And that price, we would do it again, because we know that in the end we win. And so we live in a world which does not have a Mandela factor in their memory. And so it's up to us as South Africans to strengthen the nerve of those who would like to weaken their resolve on the basis of economic self-interest. We know better. And it is in that sense that the hope of the world is not the wealthy, it is the poor who know that you don't sacrifice your own self-comfort by throwing other people under the bus. You know, I pray we never lose that memory, and that our vision of prosperity in the future should not be at the expense of others.
No, most definitely. Yeah. Lastly, before I let you go, Rav, a message to our sisters and brothers of the Christian faith heading over to a very, very auspicious weekend, especially looking at the state of the world. We spoke about it offline, about how things are very, very unprecedented. We are in uncharted waters. What should our Christian brothers and sisters be going into this weekend having in mind, and should be essentially praying for?
I think the biggest picture that is in your face about Easter is that Jesus was killed. Why? Because he was demanding what is just and what is true for everybody. He was killed by those who wanted to tribalize him and co-opt him into their own hegemony. And that costly, courageous stance against injustice, against error, should be what we carry with us into Easter. There should not be a celebration of Easter that shuns suffering, that shuns martyrdom, that shuns the sense that convictions cost. When you have convictions, be willing to pay for them. We have a situation where people don't want to pay for their faith. They want to maximize profits, maximize their own comfort. And I think to take that message into Easter, it may very well help us recalibrate our outlook in terms of our faith. Do we still have the faith of one who was killed by the powerful ruling elites because of his stance for the poor? Or have we become so co-opted by the powerful that we represent the interests of the powerful? And that, I think, is a clarion call that we must have for this Easter.
There you have it. Rev, thank you so much for joining us. It was really a pleasure, and hope we chat again soon.
Thank you, Lilo. Glad to have been here and shared this moment with you.
There we go. And with that, we're going to take a quick break. News and views will continue after this.